My name is Matthew Iavani, and I'm a partner at Full Funnel, and I want to talk to you about how sales and marketing is pretty much about to change forever as we move into 2026. So the reason that I say that is happening is we're finally at an inflection point where we're coming to a perfect storm of three things happening. The first is the advent of AI tool sets and just the sheer capability of the tools. The second is the cost of acquisition metrics for organizations to acquire new business has been essentially moving up and to the right with no end in sight since the beginning of the 2000s when we adopted the predictable revenue model, which effectively said that you need to hire lots of human capital, put those human capital members in a process to essentially run a sales and marketing program. And the third is the interoperability of these AI tool sets with normalized sales and marketing infrastructure like your CRM, marketing automation platforms, so on and so forth. The big thing that's going to happen is that organizations are going to move from what is effectively a labor-focused sales and marketing program that is saddled with a lot of different types of technology into a process engineered workflow centric sales and marketing universe that's going to be largely powered by AI workflow tool sets like clay.com. Most companies haven't really realized this shift is happening because the way that sales and marketing programs consume tool sets is really at a rep level or at a individual level. We buy tools like Zoom Info licenses, Apollo licenses, and we do these things to give the reps or to arm the reps with tool sets to make their job more efficient. And we've been doing this for like the last 10, 20 years. So as AI tool sets have come out, what organizations have tried to do is to give their teams these tools to use. What they've missed is the fact that these tools essentially, in many cases, replace the need for the team construction or the dynamic of the team that they have to exist as it does now. What they are going to start shifting towards, and we're seeing this happen right now, and it's going to really start accelerating in the next few months, is organizations are going to start to realize that process engineering lowers input costs for sales and marketing programs by a significant factor. We're talking probably 70-80% cost reduction. The ChatGPT 5s, the Anthropic Claudes, like these models are able to essentially conduct logic-based exercises at or above the capacity of a human being, in some cases, PhD level human beings. But most importantly, that's not what sales programs are made up of. Sales and marketing programs are made up of normally very average people working inside the sort of environmental constraint of a CRM or marketing automation structure. And so when you look back at the 2015 playbook, you're going to know that you're running a predictable revenue model. You're probably running a bunch of marketing automation. Sales and marketing is still not talking to each other. We have the advent of the CRO position that never really takes off because the chief revenue officer tends to be more of the sales function. It really misses the sort of marketing function. And people just frankly don't understand what the revenue operations universe is supposed to look like. And so if you're a sales and marketing leader going into 2026, you need to essentially ask yourself a very basic question. Do you actually understand how your sales and marketing program works? Not like tribal knowledge. Do you actually understand how it works at a granular level? Think of it like a skyscraper. You own the skyscraper. Do you own the engineering drawings? Do you actually understand how an organization's sales program is constructed? The reality that we see is that in the market, very few organizations are taking an approach where they're actually using lucid charts or other tools like this to build a schematic of how their sales and marketing process works. The reason why this is so important is because on the doorstep of AI automation and everything, the first thing that we need to realize is what is a company doing right this very second and how streamlined is that workflow? Many times when I interact with even big technology companies like these billion-dollar behemoths that we've all heard of, their sales program is a disaster. It is a function of tribal knowledge. It's a function of fragmented processes. It's a function of relying way too much on human beings to do the right thing every time, which we know people usually don't do. And so what we work to do is essentially create a structure where we're actually creating a version-controlled sales and marketing process so organizations can follow along with the iterations the same way that they do their applications. Like if you're building software, you version control the software because software is a program. We don't think about sales and marketing programs like that. We think about it as a human capital show. So the thought process is you really have to first identify what is a revenue operations machine in 2026. As I define revenue operations, it is revenue, which is income that passes through your organization. Operations is the operational process by which revenue passes through that organization. You have three components. Demand gen. Demand generation is about getting the horse to water. Pipeline management, which is getting the horse to drink. It's the disco call to close in a B2B context. Then you're going to have customer customer success keep that horse drinking vigorously from the trough, trying to extend that LTV, total contract value. So if you think about these three areas, the first one we can dive into is like, has demand generation changed? Well, structurally, not really. There is still, to my sort of knowledge, only 4 pillars of demand gen. You have networking and events, right? Trade shows, networking events, referrals, partners, so on and so forth. You have organic, which is going to be your SEO, keyword composition, your digital profiles, and your GEO, which is your generative engine optimization. So you can be found by LLM tools like Perplexity or ChatGPT, which is becoming the tool for white collar buyers. You're going to have paid advertising channels. This is search, social, programmatic display, directory, so on and so forth. And then you're going to have outbound prospecting, email, phone, social, occasionally text. The second thing that you're going to have is essentially a pipeline management process. Now, that pipeline management process is going to be discovery, call to close. That is the artist formerly known as sales. So you have your demand gen function that's kind of already fragmented. And then when you get to pipeline management, that's where we run into your teams of account executives, so on and so forth. Now, that demand gen function is really an area of ripe for process automation. So let's take a really easy example with demand gen, because we think about demand gen, we do keyword-based advertising, prospecting rather, through SDRs. A lot of time these SDRs are responsible for generating their own lists, and we're relying on all of these folks to sort of have great targeting. But let's just take a look at, in 2026, what you should be doing to do effectively a target addressable market exercise. Like, who are we going to talk to? What are we going to do? This is an example of what I call an ICP engine. So this is effectively a workflow process that happens inside of clay.com that's going to do a couple things. The first is it's going to look at a contact or company and say, is this an ICP fit? And if it is an ICP fit, what is their sales readiness and what's their propensity to buy from my organization? So in this instance, what I've done here is I've started with a static list of companies. So imagine I want to sell to publicly traded technology companies. Like, that's a great demographic of companies for my organization to sell to. I start by just literally pulling a list of all of the NASDAQ companies that are not government contractors, and I did that right off their website. Then what I do is I come over here and I'm going to use my Apollo subscription, because we don't use tools like ZoomInfo or anything anymore. We use essentially very cost-effective data sources. We are going to backfill the firmographic information into the table to then essentially get to a point where we have a normalized like company and contact ID. Then I'm going to start here my signal architecture. Signal architecture is so important. It's essentially qualitative factors that would illustrate that these are great prospects for you. And each individual signal is going to be done or figured out through an agentic workflow or multiple agentic workflows. And I won't go through the entire table, but I'm looking at things like their 10Ks and 10Qs. I'm looking at things like their technology stack. I'm looking at things like their Glassdoor reviews. But what I get to at the end is essentially I build a scoring system, and that scoring system allows me to assign a sales readiness score based on the weighted articulation of the variables in the table. Every organization knows the different types of organizations and like what their pain points are, how they're constructed, what they might be looking for. The challenge is they usually rely on human capital to go investigate, research, and prioritize these leads. Think of things like territory planning. Think of things like inbound lead workflows that you want an SDR to do when an inbound lead comes in. We essentially build an agentic workflow that does exactly what the utopian researcher or rep would do to get to a point of sales readiness. But we do it in an incredibly scalable, autonomous, and very quick process. Now, for things like outbound prospecting, remember email, phone, and social, right? My belief is in 2026, if your SDR team or your AEs are doing any email or any outbound LinkedIn prospecting, you are out of your mind. You can do such a more sophisticated and well-articulated outbound motion through the use of automation, clay.com, tools like that, than you can with human capital. Now, teleprospecting is the only thing an SDR should be doing inside of 2026. Like, they should only be on the phone. If I want to take the hot companies, I then create a table here where I suck in the ICP titles that you sell to. In this case, I sell to sales, marketing, and customer success roles. And then what I do is I run 2 quick workflows just using a Clayagent bot, which is Clay's native AI tool. And effectively what I'm going to do is make sure they're currently employed and then assign them to a persona category. And that personification is essentially an alley-oop on what is a messaging matrix. That messaging matrix is a knowledge repository that essentially says, like, this is what VPs of sales care about, this is what CMOs care about. And then it effectively allows the AI tool tool, in this instance, I'm using an OpenAI product, to then build copy, LinkedIn DMs, outbound emails, and it's all synthetic copy. And what that means is it's completely synthesized based on the context in this sort of table workflow. No smart tags, no, I noticed you were in XYZ city. Like, the power of doing this is absurd. Once you've done this, you can actually action right out of a table like this through an Instantly or a HubSpot or an Outreach or whatever the sort of medium of choice for distribution is. But the point of the matter is, what you're watching me do is take what is essentially 3 months of work for a sales team of 10 and create a workflow that I can run in about 5 minutes. You're talking about exponential productivity per very technocratically gifted sales and marketing asset. If you think about the broader context of a demand gen team full of SDRs, marketing folks, there's a lot of labor that is just simply not generating a lot of output. You're able to now redefine the way that you approach demand generation in this way, and it's extremely powerful. When you think about pipeline management, we usually will use binary data points, as an example, close rate for deals or average days in a deal cycle as our sort of KPIs. But there is a reality that in 2025, and as we go into 2026, almost every single sales conversation is recorded and it's transcribed in a Gong, Zoom, Otter, whatever your medium of transcription is. But yet very few organizations are doing very intelligent things with those transcripts. Some might have already bought a tool that will do something with the transcripts. Gong, as an example, has a really good in-platform sort of analysis function. But the reality is all of those transcripts can be piped into a clay table, and you can build your own custom workflows out of it. If you want to know how many times a competitor is mentioned, if you want to know the average tonality of an interaction with Amy versus Bruce, like, you can do all of this inside of a table extremely easily. The objective that you really have is to make sure that every discovery call is monitored and managed with almost CIA, NSA level intelligence. And you can do some really interesting things where you can take pipeline information and you can combine it with contextual sales conversation information, like what's going on in the conversations, and you can add external information that would not otherwise be in your system of record, your HubSpot, your Salesforce. Let's say that you're working, or someone on your team is working on a deal, they're having great rapport with the organization, it's moving forward, so on and so forth, but then all of a sudden the deal starts to lose momentum. Unbeknownst, the COO of that organization actually abruptly quit, took a couple people with them, they're over here now, there's all this fighting going on. Unless the client told you that, you would never be aware that that was happening. But as part of our intelligence deck series, which I'll link above here, we have 7 really great use cases as it relates to how you apply these tools, Clay, so on and so forth, to various intelligence scenarios up and down your sales program. You can actually build a monitoring for every active deal that you have that will essentially trigger and interact with you when something happens with that account that's relevant to your deal. So now you're taking in-platform information inside of your Salesforce, your HubSpot, whatever that might look like, and you are actually combining that with outside or external information, and you're unifying that in sort of a intelligence narrative that can be distributed to anyone in the organization, in your Slack, so on and so forth. There are so many different workflows that you can run inside of customer success to upsell, cross-sell, etc. Here's an example of a workflow that we leverage for customer success the moment somebody becomes a customer. Every week, I'm going to essentially scan through that particular customer roster and do a surveillance program to look at all of their executives, their company handles, look at any movement or activity or conversation, any news articles, RSS feeds, anything that's going to give me contextual information about this particular company. And then I'm going to have it drop right into Slack. So you can see here that the whole idea behind this is to continue to empower your CS team with the most up-to-date information and to essentially contextually identify different opportunities to go out and actually sell to their companies, right? Like, how are you going to start a conversation with a company about a cross-sell, upsell opportunity if you don't know about it? You're going to let the company tell you when the right time is. Ideally, you're always researching, you're paying attention. I used to set Google alerts for my clients when I was a salesperson. Now we are building automated systems that do this at scale, and those systems can feed into other systems that essentially go and work with a sort of more messaging engine or distribution engine. So when you think about the way that sales is changing, when you think about the way that marketing is changing, all of the work that we're doing inside of process automation is going to dramatically change the architecture of your sales and marketing program. Here is how it's going to manifest itself. First, you're going to start start focusing on process engineering as effectively the number one area of focus for the executive team at an organization. Number two is that once you understand the sort of flow or the architecture, right, the schematic of how your organization is constructed. Now, for me, I really like Clay as my workflow automation sort of AI medium. When I think about building a sales and marketing program leveraging Clay, I'm going to think about three things here. The first thing I'm going to think about is building an ICP engine. So when I think about building an ICP engine, I'm thinking about building a workflow that's effectively going to say, look at a company, look at a contact, assign the appropriate industry vertical that's applicable to the company. Then it's going to go through a variety of actions. The first is making sure that the company and the contact are ICP fits. Secondarily, making sure that the data that's in the company or contact record is complete, and if not, update, enrich, enhance. And then the third is to run signal architecture or workflow logic to assign a sales readiness score for that particular company and contact. And the applications of this are going to be very widespread. You're going to have outbound prospecting where you can use big firmographic lists and then boil those down to get to a concentrated group of people that you're going to interact with. For inbound workflows, every time someone converts, you can have that logic run so you're able to generate exceptionally tailored routing and messaging to that individual in a very dynamic way. So no longer like static workflows or fields or smart fields, none of that. Lastly, you can use the ICP engine as a cleaning mechanism to keep your data set accurate. Every time you run your sales CRM or marketing automation database through the ICP engine, it's going to validate that the contact or company should be there, make sure all the information is accurate, up to date, into the level of specificity that you want. It's going to use all of that logic that we've created to assign a sales readiness score for that period of time. So let's say you do this every 6 months, it's going to give you a new prioritized workflow of companies that should be considering your service every 6 months or every time you run that flow. So when you kind of think about the application of an ICP engine, it's extremely productive in terms of how you would go about doing it. And then it goes into the messaging engine. Now, the messaging engine is really simple. It is effectively a big knowledge repository, usually in a spreadsheet, that's going to talk about all sorts of people that you would sell to. And it's going to talk about their pain points, their use cases, the verbiage that you would use, so on and so forth. And this document essentially is a knowledge repository that an AI tool is going to look at as it takes into consideration the contextual information from a company and a contact, and then essentially routes all of that information through this logic about what that particular person and position would care about to then derive a message or something synthetically generated that is going to be impactful and, more importantly, specific to that individual. You can use this workflow for inbound, for outbound, for chat workflows, and that's really the thesis behind that. When you get to a distribution engine, you're talking about outbound prospecting, email, phone, and social. There's only so many different ways of doing it. Remember, in 2026, you should only be having SDRs use the phone. Everything else should be essentially automated through email, through LinkedIn. And then lastly, for your inbound, is that inbound is usually done by, in paid advertising as an example, using keywords or firmographic details for top, middle, and bottom of the funnel advertising. But you're really relying on Google and the other platforms to ingest all that information and make their assessment of what makes a great fit for you. By leveraging Clay, you can actually do the distillation of all the companies in market and who is the most probable to buy your service, and then use that group as your custom audience group, which in some cases like LinkedIn can be exact one-to-one mirroring, where in other platforms it may be more sort of thematic. But what this is going to do is it's actually going to increase the efficacy of your ad dollars because you're just getting less bycatch. So by adopting this sort of AI framework, this engine framework, you're going to be able to have a much more productive process engineered sales and marketing function in 2026. My name is Matt Iavani. I'm a partner at Full Funnel, and we are at the forefront of AI automation in sales and marketing. And I'd love to understand what you folks are doing at your organization in the comments. Thank you so much. See you next time.